No Japanese military student possessing any basic knowledge of military logistics could fail to foresee ultimate defeat for our nation in a prolonged war. A Japanese officer wrote those words after the war ended. He was not describing shock. He was not processing unexpected defeat. He was describing what he and his colleagues already understood before the first bomb fell on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The Pacific stretches 3 million square miles. It is the largest ocean on Earth. On the morning of December the 7th, 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack against the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor. Not because Japan believes it can destroy the United States, but because Japan believes the United States will choose not to be destroyed. The entire strategy rests on one assumption, that Americans, shocked and bloodied, will decide the Pacific is not worth the cost and accept a negotiated settlement. Japan will lock in its gains, consolidate its empire, and the war will be short. The Americans do not flinch. They build. And now Japan has a problem with no solution. A prolonged war it knew it could not win, and a system designed to make stopping it impossible. This is a story about what happens when a nation builds a machine for war, engineers it specifically to be impossible to stop, and then loses the war anyway. 3 systems, a code, a council, and a strategy of dying, locked together and carried a nation toward the abyss. This is the story of how they did it, and about the single mechanism those systems accidentally left intact. It is the summer of 1944. The island of Saipan has fallen to American forces. At the northern tip of the island, at a place the Americans will later call Banzai Cliff, thousands of Japanese civilians climb to the edge. 80 feet below, the Pacific glitters in the morning sun. Men jump, women jump, parents jump with their children held against them. Most of them have never seen an American soldier. They have been told that if they are captured, they will be raped and mutilated. So they jump. The question is how a society arrives at that cliff. Everything that follows is the answer. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor is, at its core, a calculated bet. Japan's planners are not deluded about American industrial capacity. They understand, with perfect clarity, that a prolonged war against the United States is unwinnable. What they believe, what the entire strategy requires, is that the war will not be prolonged. The bet works like this. Japan strikes hard, seizes the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and builds a defensive perimeter so wide and so costly that the Americans calculate the price of reclaiming it is simply too high. American public opinion, fractured and war-weary, forces a negotiated settlement. Japan keeps its empire. The United States keeps its pride. Everyone goes home. Japan has studied American politics. It has watched isolationist sentiment run deep through the 1930s. And the attack at Pearl Harbor is genuinely stunning. The battleship Roe in flames, the harbor choked with smoke, 18 warships damaged or destroyed. But the Americans choose not just to fight back, but to fight all the way. They build. Every month that passes, the gap in industrial capacity widens. By the spring of 1942, Japan must deliver a knockout blow, or it never will. The target is Midway, a tiny atoll in the Central Pacific whose airfields the Japanese believe will force the American fleet into a decisive engagement. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, Japan's carrier fleet, the most powerful in the world, sails into a trap it cannot see. In 4 days, Japan loses 4 fleet carriers. It loses hundreds of its most experienced naval aviators. It loses the strategic initiative. It never gets it back. The war is, by every material measure, effectively over in June 1942. The question that will occupy the next 3 years and cost 3 million Japanese lives is why no one can say so. What happened at the cliffs of Saipan begins with an idea, not what those civilians were told. what they believed in the marrow of their bones, because the state had spent decades putting it there. The code begins with something real. The samurai traditions of feudal Japan carried genuine ideas about loyalty, discipline, and death. The acceptance that a warrior's life belongs entirely to his lord, that defeat brings dishonor, that dying well is a form of mastery. These ideas have roots in Buddhism, in Confucianism, in centuries of warrior culture. They are not invented. What the Japanese military state does with them in the 20th century is something different, something deliberate. After Japan's victory over China in 1895, the military begins to reshape this inheritance into an instrument of control. The warrior code, Bushido, is systematized, standardized, pushed into every school and every barracks. The old samurai ethic of a small warrior class is rebranded as the spiritual inheritance of every Japanese person. By the 1930s, the indoctrination machine is fully operational. The emperor is no longer simply the head of state. He is a literal descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. His word is sacred. His cause is divine. Dying in his service does not end a life. It purifies it. At the center of this transformed code is one concept above all others, Gyokusai, shattering like a jewel. The idea that a glorious death in battle is not failure but fulfillment, that to be broken, fighting is worth more than to survive in defeat. Surrender is not merely forbidden. It is a spiritual catastrophe. It dishonors the soldier, his family, his ancestors. It places him beneath contempt. The legal machinery makes the moral machinery concrete. The 1928 Military Field Manual contains a provision: a commander who allows his unit to surrender without fighting to the last man shall be punishable by death. The numbers at Kwajalein Atoll show what this code produces. Of the Japanese garrison defending the island, 98.4% die in combat. Not wounded, dead. Now it is July 1944. American forces are advancing across Saipan. General Yoshitsugu Saito, the Japanese commander, has already committed seppuku in his cave. His men have launched a final banzai charge, thousands of soldiers running into American lines, dying by the hundreds. And now the civilians reach the cliffs. They are not soldiers. They have received no military training. They are men and women, old people, and some of them are holding their children. They have been told this their entire lives, by their schools, their government, their newspapers, by the weight of the emperor's divine authority. They stand at the edge of an 80-foot cliff above blue water on a summer morning, and they step off. Midway is a catastrophe. Japan loses 4 fleet carriers in a single engagement. The men who command the Pacific Fleet understand what this means. But the Japanese public hears almost nothing. A few careful lines in the state press, a victorious engagement in the Central Pacific, some losses acknowledged vaguely. The carriers are not mentioned. The shift in momentum is not mentioned. This concealment is not an accident, it is policy. And it has consequences the government cannot foresee, because the lies that maintain morale also destroy the intelligence picture on which any realistic assessment must rest. Japan's intelligence failures run deep and consistent throughout the war. At Bataan in 1942, Japanese army officers estimate the defending force at 25,000 men. There are 80,000 on the peninsula. At Singapore, they estimate British forces at 30,000. There are 85,000. At Midway itself, they estimate the American garrison at 750 men and 60 aircraft. There are more than 3,000 men and 121 combat aircraft. These are not individual errors. They are a pattern, rooted in the foundational assumption that Japanese spiritual resolve compensates for material deficiency, that the enemy, lacking the code, lacks the will, that the numbers, therefore, don't matter. The numbers keep mattering. By July 1944, the island of Saipan falls. American bombers are now within range of Tokyo. The loss cannot be managed in the press. The Tojo cabinet collapses. General Hideki Tojo, who had held 3 of the 6 seats on Japan's Supreme War Council simultaneously, who had pushed Japan into the conflict and quashed every serious peace overture while he had the power, is swept from office by the senior statesman who can read a map. The government changes. The war policy does not. Leadership knows with certainty that the war is effectively lost. They remove the man at the top. They install a new prime minister. And then they keep fighting because the man at the top was never the problem. The machine is the problem. And the machine does not change with the cabinet. The machine has a name. The Supreme Council for the Direction of the War. 6 men who hold ultimate authority over Japan's war policy. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Army Minister, the Navy Minister, the Army Chief of Staff, the Navy Chief of Staff. Any major decision requires their unanimous consent. 6 men, 1 veto, no exceptions. In the summer of 1945, 3 of those seats belong to men who will not stop. War Minister General Kurechika Anami, Army Chief of Staff General Yoshijiro Umezu, Navy Chief of Staff Admiral Soemu Toyoda. On June 6, 1945, the Supreme Council votes formally on war policy. The result is unanimous. Fight to extinction. Anami is the one to understand. He is stocky, physically vigorous for a man of 58, known by his subordinates for a personal warmth that is genuinely unusual in the senior imperial officer corps. He believes in the emperor. He believes in the code. He believes in the soldier's obligation to fight until the decision comes from above and not one moment before. That conviction is not performance. It is the single most important reason the war continues through the summer of 1945. On the other side of the table sit Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, and Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki. 3 men who understand, and have understood for some time, that the war must end. They cannot say so openly. In Japan in 1945, a senior official who speaks publicly of peace risks assassination, not metaphorically, but literally. Ultra-nationalist factions within the military have already killed prime ministers and generals for showing weakness. The peace faction operates in the shadows of its own government, making quiet contacts, hoping for a mechanism. The mechanism they settle on is the Soviet Union. Japan and the USSR are not at war. The Soviets have remained formally neutral in the Pacific. Perhaps the Soviets will mediate. Perhaps they can be induced to approach the Americans and negotiate terms that preserve the imperial system. Japan begins cultivating the channel carefully, earnestly, with real desperation. It is, by the summer of 1945, their last diplomatic card. There is something the Japanese peace faction does not know. At Yalta, in February 1945, Stalin had already secretly agreed with Roosevelt and Churchill to enter the Pacific War within 3 months of Germany's surrender. The terms are already set, in exchange for territorial concessions in Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands. The Soviets have been maintaining their diplomatic engagement with Japan specifically to prevent the Japanese from seeking other channels. They are stringing along a drowning man while preparing to push him under. Japan is banking its last hope on a country that is planning to declare war on it. One more constraint the peace faction cannot break. The Allied demand for unconditional surrender has never addressed the single question that matters most to every faction in the Japanese government. What happens to the emperor? If Hirohito is deposed, tried, executed, the imperial system dismantled, then the war has no honorable end, and the hardliners' position is easy to hold. The Potsdam Declaration, issued on July 26, 1945, does not answer this question. The ambiguity is a gift to Anami's faction. The cage has no key. By the spring of 1945, Japan has abandoned any strategy of winning. What has replaced it is called Ketsugo, the decisive operation. Its premise is not victory, but cost. American forces will eventually attempt to invade the Japanese home islands. When they do, Japan will make the price of that invasion so catastrophic, so many American dead, so much American blood, that American public opinion will fracture. The will to sustain total war will break before Japan's capacity to absorb punishment does. The Allies will accept negotiated terms rather than continue. The inventory for this plan by July 1945, more than 10,000 aircraft, the majority converted to kamikaze missions, waiting for the invasion fleet. At Okinawa, fewer than 2,000 kamikazes had launched and still managed to sink dozens of ships, wound hundreds more, and produce American casualty figures that shook Allied planners. Ketsugo contemplates 5 times that number against a fleet that cannot simply retreat. But Ketsugo is not only a military plan, it is a social architecture. All school classes in Japan are cancelled in the summer of 1945, freeing 13 million young people to be organized and deployed. They are divided into Labor Corps, Reserve units, and the Civilian Volunteer Corps, which comprises everyone above the age of 15 who has not been assigned elsewhere. The women and older men are drilled with sharpened bamboo poles. Not symbolic resistance, actual drill. For an actual invasion they have been told is coming to their actual shore. A propaganda campaign runs simultaneously. The glorious death of 100 million. When the Americans come, every Japanese person will fight and, if necessary, die. This is not a call for sacrifice in the abstract. It is preparation for a planned national event, designed to extract a political concession from an enemy who, as it happens, is preparing to make that invasion unnecessary. An army believes in this. So do Umezu and Toyoda. They have been formed by the same system they are now asking their people to die inside of. And their entire position rests on one assumption, that the Americans must invade. That assumption is about to be destroyed. It is August 6, 1945. A single B-29 superfortress called the Enola Gay releases one bomb over the city of Hiroshima at 8:15 in the morning. The bomb is called Little Boy. In the seconds that follow, the city center ceases to exist. Army leadership in the initial hours reports it as a conventional bombing raid. The hardliners absorb the news and begin preparing to impose martial law on the capital, to prevent anyone in the government from using the destruction as a pretext for peace. August 8th, Moscow. Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov summons Japanese Ambassador Naotake Sato and reads from a prepared statement. The Soviet Union is at war with Japan, effective the following day. More than 1 million Soviet troops are already moving across the Manchurian border. The mediation Japan has been cultivating for months. The last diplomatic card, the carefully maintained channel, the thing the peace faction banked everything on, is revealed in a single official sentence as a fiction. There is nothing further to say. The following morning, August 9th, the Supreme Council gathers for the first time to formally respond to Hiroshima. While they are in session, word arrives that a second bomb has fallen on Nagasaki. The familiar deadlock assembles itself at the table. Togo, Suzuki, and Yonai accept one condition: preserve the emperor. Anami, Umezu, and Toyoda demand 4. Preserve the emperor, no occupation, Japanese disarmament on Japanese terms, Japanese control of any war crimes proceedings. Without all 4, they want the battle on the beaches. The cabinet convenes, the deadlock holds. The day ends without resolution. Prime Minister Suzuki, 77 years old, walking a tightrope between factions that would each gladly see him dead, calls for something that has not been called in this war: an imperial conference, a conference before the emperor, at midnight. The underground shelter beneath the imperial palace is not a large room, it is an air raid shelter. Concrete walls, low ceiling, a single overhead light. Tokyo in August is brutal with heat and humidity, and the shelter holds both. Around a long table sit the 6 men who have deadlocked Japan into the abyss, and behind them their advisors. The emperor arrives in formal court dress. Hirohito is physically slight, wire-rimmed glasses, a scholar who has spent his adult life publishing papers on Pacific hydrozoans while the state required him to be a god. He sits at the head of the table. Each side presents its case, the same arguments they have been making for months. At approximately 2 in the morning, Prime Minister Suzuki rises. He turns to the emperor. He asks him explicitly to break the deadlock. The room becomes very quiet. What Hirohito says is not a long speech. He says he has given serious thought to the situation at home and abroad. He says that continuing the war can only mean destruction for the nation and prolongation of bloodshed and cruelty in the world. He says he concurs with the foreign minister's position. One condition: preserve the emperor. The unanimous consent rule, the structural device that had made peace politically impossible, that had given Anami's faction its veto for years, has no provision for a direct imperial command. To disobey the emperor is not political dissent. It is treason against the divine. Anami, Umezu, and Toyoda bow their heads, but the machine does not die quietly. By the evening of August 14th, as the news spreads through military command channels, a faction within the Imperial Guard refuses to accept it. They believe the emperor is being manipulated, that the peace faction has deceived him, that the true imperial will is to fight. Around 1,000 soldiers move through the palace grounds in the darkness, raiding offices, searching for the recording of the surrender broadcast scheduled to air the following noon. They kill a general, they forge orders, they seize the NHK building. They cannot find the recording, which has been hidden in a laundry basket among the papers of the imperial household staff. While the soldiers rage through the palace corridors, there is a man sitting alone in a room. War Minister General Kurechika Anami has accepted the emperor's decision. He submitted when the emperor spoke, and he has not wavered from that submission, but he will not survive it. Before dawn, he writes a death poem. Believing in the eternity of our divine land, I die. Then he takes a short blade and plunges it into the left side of his abdomen. He dies before the broadcast airs at noon. He dies before the emperor's voice reaches the Japanese people. He dies without hearing the words that end the war he spent the last months of his life holding together. The war that the code he enforced on millions of soldiers now demands of him in return. He is the machine's most faithful servant. He exits exactly as the machine requires. By 8 in the morning, the coup has collapsed. Its officers die by their own hands on the palace grounds. Major Kenji Hatanaka shoots himself in the head outside the NHK building minutes before the broadcast. At noon, an announcer tells the nation to stand. The national anthem plays. And then the Japanese people hear, for the first time in their lives, the voice of their emperor. It is formal, archaic court Japanese, so elevated in register that many listeners cannot fully parse it. The emperor speaks of the war situation having developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. He speaks of a new and most cruel bomb. He does not use the word surrender. He does not say defeat. He simply describes a world in which continuing is no longer possible. Across Japan, at noon, people kneel on the ground beside radios. Men in military uniform press their foreheads to the earth. Women cover their mouths. Children watch adults weep. The cicadas are very loud. In the days that follow, Navy Minister Yonai tells Hirohito something with a particular edge. The atomic bombs and the Soviet entry into the war are, in a sense, divine gifts. The term is inappropriate, he acknowledges. But without them, the peace faction had no political cover to act. The bombs did not simply destroy 2 cities. They gave 3 men at a conference table the only thing they had never been able to generate through politics alone, a reason the hardliners could not refuse. The debate about which mattered more, the bombs or the Soviet entry or their combination, has occupied historians for decades and remains genuinely contested. What is not contested is that without one or both, the deadlock held. And the deadlock meant the beaches, and the beaches meant Ketsugo, which was, by August, already obsolete. Every kamikaze fueled and waiting, every bamboo spear sharpened, every teenager organized and drilled. All of it preparation for an invasion the Americans no longer needed to attempt. The entire architecture had been rendered bankrupt before a single American soldier set foot on Japanese soil. Nearly 3 million Japanese were dead. Cities reduced to ash. A generation scattered across Pacific islands and Asian jungles, most of them never coming home. The system that produced all of this did not stop cleanly on August 15, 1945. Some of its parts were still running. Japanese soldiers kept fighting in China through 1946, 1947, 1948, caught between communist and nationalist forces, unable or unwilling to accept that their war had ended. Holdout groups on Guadalcanal, on Peleliu, in the Philippine Hills. Men who believed the surrender announcement was American propaganda because they had been formed by a system that told them American propaganda was everywhere and the war news was always lies. Then there is Hiroo Onoda. In March 1974, a man emerges from the jungle of Lubang Island in the Philippines. He is wearing a Japanese army uniform that he has maintained through nearly 3 decades of jungle fighting. He is carrying a rifle that still functions. He is 52 years old. Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda had been assigned to Lubang Island in December 1944, ordered to conduct guerrilla warfare and await the main army's return. He was 24. The war ended when he was still 24. He fought for 29 more years because the ideology that formed him told him surrender was impossible, because the leaflets dropped from aircraft announcing the war's end were obviously enemy propaganda, because his orders were explicit and his commanding officer had never countermanded them. He shot at Philippine police officers and soldiers into the 1970s. He lived in the jungle through the entirety of Japan's post-war reconstruction, through the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, through the decades when the country rebuilt everything the machine had destroyed. He did not stop until his former commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, flew from Japan to the Philippines in 1974 and found him in the jungle and gave him the order in person, face to face, standing before him in civilian clothes. Only then did Onoda accept that the war was over. The code that made surrender unthinkable. The command structure that permitted no individual judgment. The ideology pressed so deep that it ran independent of any external reality. Everything this story has traced, the system that produced the cliffs at Saipan, that paralyzed the Big Six, that built Ketsugo, is present in one man's biography. He is not an aberration. He is what the machine produces when it runs to its end. When Hiroo Onoda finally walked out of the jungle and surrendered his rifle, he wept. Not because the war being over was welcome news. He wept because he had fought so hard and for so long, and in the end, the war had been over all along. The Pacific does not answer that. It just keeps moving,